The private dining room was already full when I walked in. Every seat taken, every glass filled, candles lit, laughter moving around that table like the evening had been running for an hour without me. Because it had. Shalette sat at the center of it, her back straight, her diamonds catching the light, every inch of her performing the life she wanted people to believe she had built herself. Sheldon beside her, his mother Judith across from him. The full rehearsal party settled in like the room belonged to them. It did not belong to them. Shalette looked up when I entered. The laughter didn't stop immediately, it just shifted, thinned, and then she smiled at me, the way you smile at someone you've already decided to humiliate, and pointed to a fold-out chair near the service entrance, right beside the trash. "Sorry, this table's for family only." The room laughed. Some of them covered it, some didn't bother. Sheldon looked down at his plate like the tablecloth had suddenly become very interesting. Judith caught my eye from across the room, just for a second, then looked away first. I walked to the fold-out chair, sat down, straightened my jacket. When the server came, I ordered water, nothing else. And for the next 2 hours, I sat in that chair, alone, eating nothing, saying nothing, watching everything. My name is Jocelyn Ardmore. I spent 30 years as a corporate event director managing luxury hotel accounts across the Southeast. I have coordinated dinners for sitting senators, negotiations for Fortune 500 boards, and farewell galas for executives whose names you would recognize immediately. I know how a room works. I know who holds it. And I have always known exactly whose name was on the reservation for that private dining room. Mine. For those of you just joining this story, before we go any further, tell me where you're watching from. Drop it in the comments. I want to know who's in this room with me tonight. I sat in that chair and I let the evening happen. I let the food come and go to their table. I let the toasts happen without me. I let Judith Price lift a glass in that room like she had any standing to celebrate, in a space I had secured through a professional contact I had known for 11 years. I let all of it happen because I already knew something every single person at that table did not. This moment was not a surprise. I had known it was coming for 3 days. I had come anyway, dressed impeccably, arrived on time, and taken my seat. Because I needed them to give me exactly what they gave me. Recognition is different from hurt. What I felt sitting in that chair was not grief. It was confirmation. The kind that settles into your chest quietly, like the last piece of something sliding into place. Then the bill arrived. $3,800. The server moved through the room and stopped beside me because the reservation was in my name, and the system knew it, even if no one at that table had thought to ask. Every head turned. Shalette's smile flickered just slightly. Sheldon finally looked up from his plate. I looked at the bill. Then I looked at the server. Then I smiled, slowly. The way you smile when you have been patient for a very long time. "Wrong table," I said. The server nodded and moved toward the main table without a word. I stood, collected my purse, and walked out of that private dining room without looking back once. I heard chairs shifting, voices starting. I did not turn around. In the parking garage, I sat in my car with the engine off, still dressed, hands in my lap. I was not crying. I opened my phone and scrolled to a name. I did not call it yet. I just looked at it. I drove home through Atlanta without the radio on. The city moved past my windows the way it always does at night, lit up, indifferent, full of people living inside decisions they haven't fully examined yet. I know that feeling. I lived inside mine for years without turning the lights on. Tonight, the lights were on. I did not cry on the drive home. I want to be clear about that. What happened at that dinner did not break something in me. It confirmed something I had been circling for months without landing on directly. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the confirmation had settled so completely that I sat in the car for a full minute before going inside. Not from grief, but from the particular stillness that comes when you finally stop arguing with yourself. I went straight to my study, still dressed, still in the same shoes I had worn to that hotel. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and I started pulling files. Bank statements going back 14 months. The lease co-sign agreement for Chalette's apartment, my signature on the guarantor line, dated 3 years ago. A car note with my name listed as the secondary obligor. Vendor confirmation emails from 2 wedding contacts I had reached personally, calling in professional relationships I had spent 30 years building. I laid everything across my desk in sequence, the way I used to lay event timelines flat before a major production. Every element visible, nothing overlapping, nothing hidden. I have managed accounts for other people my entire career. I know how to read a financial picture without flinching. What I saw on that desk was not complicated. It was clear. Chalette's life, the apartment she called hers, the car she drove, the wedding vendors who answered her calls, was underwritten by my name, my credit, and my relationships. Not partially, structurally. Seeing it all flat at once was different from knowing it piece by piece. The joint account withdrawals I had reviewed individually over recent weeks read differently as a pattern. The amounts were not reckless. They were consistent, methodical, almost. The kind of drawing down that happens when someone has quietly decided that a resource is available indefinitely. I was reaching for the vendor folder when my hand found something else entirely. A birthday card. 5 years old. Chalette's handwriting on the front, my name, underlined once the way she used to do when she was being affectionate. I opened it before I thought to stop myself. Inside, in the same handwriting, "You're the reason I am everything I am. Love always." I held it for a long moment. Then I set it face down on the desk and went back to the files. Not because it didn't matter. Because it mattered in a way that belonged to a different conversation, one that required a foundation I was still in the process of building. At the bottom of the stack, I found what I had placed there 3 weeks ago after my first phone call with my attorney. Her business card. I picked it up and turned it over. She had written one line on the back in her own hand at the end of that first call when I told her I needed a few more weeks to be certain. Ready when you are. I sat with that line for a moment. 3 weeks ago, I had not been ready. I had still been leaving a small space open. The kind of space you leave not because you believe something will change, but because closing it feels permanent. I understood now that the dinner had not created anything. It had simply removed the last reason I had been giving myself to wait. I picked up my phone, dialed. It was late, close to 11. She answered on the second ring. I said only, "I'm ready." The line was quiet for exactly 1 second. Then she said, "I'll have everything prepared by morning." I set the phone down and sat in the silence of my study, files spread across the desk, birthday card face down among them. And for the first time since I walked into that hotel, I felt something close to peace. I was dressed before the sun came up. Not because I couldn't sleep. I slept 4 hours, clean and dreamless. The way you sleep when a decision has already been made and your body knows it. I was up before sunrise because there was something I needed to hold in my hands before the day moved any further. I called Carol Watkins at 6:47 in the morning. We worked alongside each other for 11 years when I was corporate event director at the Buckhead property. She managed guest services. I managed everything that happened inside the event spaces. She knew my voice before I finished saying her name. I told her I needed a copy of the reservation agreement for the private dining room from the previous evening. She said she would have it to me within the hour. It arrived in 40 minutes. I printed it at my kitchen table and read it once, slowly, the way I used to read event contracts before signing, not scanning, reading. Every line. My name at the top, my card number in the billing field, my signature dated 6 weeks prior, the hotel confirmation number, the deposit amount, $620, charged and cleared, the private dining room, the date, the time, all of it mine, the room they laughed in, the table they sat at, the evening they hosted, without a single thought about who made it possible. I did not feel vindicated reading that document. Vindication implies surprise. I had known my name was on that reservation every minute I sat in that fold-out chair. I had chosen to say nothing. I had chosen to wait. I had let the bill be the only thing that spoke, because some truths land harder when they arrive on their own. My phone rang while I was still holding the printout. Shalette. I watched her name on the screen until it stopped. It rang again 30 seconds later. I set the phone face down on top of the reservation document and went to make coffee. While the coffee brewed, I opened the manila folder I had started the night before and I laid everything out on the kitchen table in order. The reservation printout, the 2 wedding vendor contracts, the venue deposit and the catering agreement, both secured through relationships I had built across 3 decades in this industry, both carrying preferential rates that existed because vendors in this city knew my name and trusted my word. Without my name, those rates did not exist. Without my calls, those contracts would not have been answered. Beside them, the apartment lease cosign, my signature on the guarantor line, the car note, same. The joint account statements showing a pattern of withdrawals across 14 months that I had reviewed individually, but never laid flat together until last night. I stood over that table and I looked at what I had built, not what I had given. What I had built. There is a difference. Giving implies a choice made freely each time. What was on that table was a structure, load-bearing, invisible to the person it was holding up, and assembled so quietly over so many years that the person living inside it had mistaken the walls for her own. Every door Shalette walked through in planning this wedding opened because of my name, not hers. I folded the reservation printout once, placed it in the manila folder, wrote 1 word on the tab, and filed it in the cabinet beside my desk. The moment I closed that drawer, I felt the shift. Not dramatic, not loud. Just the quiet, irreversible movement from one state to another. I picked up my phone and made 1 call. I spoke briefly, quietly. When I ended the call, I set the phone on the counter and looked out the kitchen window at Atlanta, waking up outside. My face in the glass was unreadable. I had already decided. 3 days before the dinner, Tuesday morning, I was at my kitchen table with my coffee when my phone rang. Darlette Odom has been my closest friend for 22 years. I know her rings. She lets it go twice before hanging up if she thinks she's interrupting something. This time, she let it ring through. I answered. She didn't open with a greeting. She said, "I need you to hear something, and I need you to stay on the line until I finish." I set my cup down. A woman who had known me since Shalette was in middle school had attended Shalette's bridal planning gathering 2 weeks prior. She sat with it for 2 days before she called Darlette because she couldn't bring herself to call me directly. What she heard at that gathering was Shalette describing, in detail, to a room full of women, exactly what she planned to do at the rehearsal dinner. The fold-out chair, the placement near the service entrance, the line she intended to deliver. The room had laughed. And then Shalette had said something that the woman could not unhear, that it was time her mother understood her place. I listened to all of it without saying a word. When Darlette finished the line, went quiet. She let the silence sit for a moment, then asked, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to go to dinner." "Jocelyn." Her voice carried the particular weight of a woman who loves you and cannot understand your stillness. "You don't have to sit there and let her do that to you." "No," I said quietly. "I need to see whether she'll actually do it." Darlette didn't answer immediately. I continued. "For months, I've been asking myself whether I'm reacting to patterns or facts, whether I'm seeing things clearly or making excuses for things I don't want to see. If she does it in front of that room, in front of family, friends, and her future husband's family, then I'll have my answer." "You're willing to sit through that?" "I'm willing to stop guessing." The line was quiet again. Then Darlette said, softly, "I hate that you're right." I didn't explain anything further. Some things only make sense after they've already happened. 6 weeks before the dinner. I want to be precise about the timeline because it matters. Darlette's call did not send me to my attorney's office. I had already been there. The first conversation with my attorney had happened nearly 2 months prior. A quiet, careful discussion about restructuring, about what I held, about what I wanted to happen to it. What Darlette's call did was remove the last reason I had been giving myself to wait. The morning after her call, I sat across from my attorney in her office on Peachtree, and I told her I was ready to finalize everything. The irrevocable trust had been drafted across 3 prior meetings. That morning, it was signed and funded. An irrevocable trust means exactly what it sounds like for practical purposes. Once executed, it is designed to stand on its own. The beneficiaries, the structure, and the assets placed inside it are not things that can simply be changed because someone is unhappy with the outcome. That permanence was the point. My will, a separate document, was revised that same morning to direct my remaining estate assets into that trust upon my death. The will stays amendable. The trust does not. Both instruments name Philip Ardmore and his children as sole beneficiaries. Shalette's name appears in neither. That was not a decision made in anger. It was a decision made across 8 weeks of careful, clear-eyed thought and confirmed, finally, by a woman who knew my daughter well enough to call Darlette from a borrowed moment of courage. I walked out of that office into a bright Atlanta morning, and I did not feel relieved. I felt finished. There is a difference. Relief implies you were afraid of something. I had simply completed something that was long overdue. This morning, the day after the dinner, I opened the manila folder on my desk, the one I labeled and filed yesterday. And I placed the signed trust confirmation beside the reservation printout. 2 pieces of paper, side by side on the desk in front of me. One showed what I had arranged for that room. The other showed what I had arranged for everything else. I looked at them both for a long moment. Then I picked up my pen and began writing a list. The list was not emotional. That was the point. 12 lines. My handwriting, the same precise script I used for 30 years on event timelines and account summaries. No explanations beside the entries. No commentary. Just the facts of what I held, written in the order I intended to address them. Joint savings account. Primary holder, Jocelyn Ardmore. Apartment lease, guarantor signature, Jocelyn Ardmore. Vehicle note, secondary obligor, Jocelyn Ardmore. Wedding venue deposit, card on file, Jocelyn Ardmore. Wedding catering deposit, card on file, Jocelyn Ardmore. I read it the way I would read any account inventory, without sentiment, without ceremony. Since Norbert passed 8 years ago, Shalette and Philip have moved in opposite directions. Philip stayed close. Shalette pulled away from the family and toward a life she was building on the surface. They are not enemies. They are strangers who share the Ardmore name. The name Norbert gave this family, the name I kept, the name both of his children carry. That detail matters to what comes next. What I understand now, and what I did not fully understand for years, is that support can become structure before you notice it happening. Every time I co-signed something, covered a gap, extended a little more patience, I told myself I was giving my daughter time to find her footing. Families do that. Mothers, especially. You don't always recognize the moment help becomes expectation until long after it has happened. I started at the top of the list. The joint account separation had been initiated the previous evening through my bank's after-hours line. That morning, I confirmed the processing, removing myself as primary holder and capping the remaining balance at the minimum required to keep the account open. The bank sent a confirmation to my email at 9:41. I printed it and added it to the manila folder. 1 item crossed off. 11 remaining. I then opened the trust document my attorney had couriered to my home that morning. The executed copy. The one with both signatures and the notary seal. I read through it not because I needed to verify its contents, but because I believe in knowing exactly what you have signed. Philip Ardmore, his children, an irrevocable structure. No ambiguity in the language. Clear beneficiary designations. Careful drafting intended to leave as little room for dispute as possible. What I want to be clear about, for anyone who might wonder, is that Shalet's name was never included in this document. It was not removed. It was never written. That decision was not made in a single meeting. It was not made after one argument. It was not made because of one dinner. It was made across years of watching the difference between occasional help and permanent dependence become harder and harder to see. There is a difference between being taken out of something and never being placed inside it. One is punishment. The other is clarity. I was still holding the trust document when my phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. Time-stamped from earlier that morning. I had been on calls and missed it. Shalet's name on the screen. I played it once. Her voice came through measured and almost casual, with the particular tone she uses when she expects to be accommodated. Mama, I know last night was a little tense, but I really need you to call me back about the florist situation. I deleted it and returned to my list. The vendor deposits were the last 2 items I had marked with a note rather than an action. Wedding venue, deposit charged to my card, rate secured through a contact I had worked with for 19 years. Wedding catering, same structure, different contact, same principle. Both rates existed because of who I was in that industry. Without my card, the deposits had no coverage. Without my name, the vendors would not have extended those terms to begin with. I wrote 2 words beside both entries. Not yet. Timing is the difference between reaction and strategy. I had not come this far to move carelessly. At 10:53, my phone buzzed on the desk. A bank notification. The joint account separation had fully processed. I looked at the notification for exactly as long as it took to read it. Somewhere across Atlanta, that same alert was arriving on Shalet's phone. I set my phone face down and returned to my list. I already knew what was coming. I was not rushing any of it. She called 19 minutes after the bank notification. I was still at my desk when the phone rang. I let it ring twice, set my pen down, and answered on the 3rd ring with the same voice I use for everything. Warm, even, unhurried. The voice I developed over 30 years of managing rooms full of people who needed to believe everything was under control. Hey, sweetheart. Shalet started casually. That told me everything. She had rehearsed the opening, kept it light, kept it conversational, the way you approach something you want to minimize before the other person can make it large. She asked how I was doing. I told her I was fine. She asked if I had slept well. I told her I had. Then she moved to it. I got a notification from the bank this morning about the joint account. It's showing some kind of change. I think there might be an error on their end. I've been doing some reorganizing, I said. Everything is fine on my end. A pause. Short, but I felt her recalibrating inside it. What kind of reorganizing? Just tidying some things up. How are the wedding preparations coming? She didn't want to talk about the wedding. She wanted to talk about the account. She tried twice more to bring it back, framing it as confusion, then as inconvenience, each time expecting me to fill the silence with an explanation. I didn't fill anything. I asked about the florist. I asked whether the rehearsal dinner venue had confirmed the final head count. I kept my voice at the same temperature throughout. Pleasant, interested, entirely unreachable. I could hear it happening on her end. The slight increase in pace, the breath that came just before she changed direction. Shalette has always moved faster when she feels the ground shifting. Then I heard Sheldon enter the room where she was standing. She covered the phone, not fully, just enough, and whispered something to him. I couldn't make out the words. What I heard was his silence. He didn't respond audibly. A moment later, I heard a door close, and Shalette came back to the call with a different energy than she'd left it with. Mama. Her voice had dropped the casual register entirely. Are you angry about the dinner? I let the pause sit for exactly the right length of time, not long enough to seem dramatic, long enough to be deliberate. Why would I be angry, Shalette? I said. You told me where my table was. The line went completely still. I had not raised my voice. I had not sharpened my tone. I had not reached for hurt or accusation or any of the emotional registers she knew how to respond to. What I had given her was something she had no practiced response for. A sentence delivered with the same warmth as everything before it, carrying the full weight of what had happened, requiring nothing from her in return. She said my name once more, quietly. I told her to enjoy the rest of her day. The call ended politely, the way all of our calls end. I set the phone down and drew a single line through the first item on my list. I did not sit with the conversation. I did not replay it. The chapter of that call was closed. What I had not said was the point. I had not said I was hurt. I had not said I was angry. I had not said I was owed anything. I had given her nothing to argue against, nothing to manage, nothing to soothe. For a woman who had spent years knowing exactly how to handle her mother, that was the most disorienting thing I could have offered. Across Atlanta, Sheldon was in the kitchen when Shalette walked back in. She told him about the account. He looked at her and asked one question. How much was in it? Not, what did she say? Not, are you okay? Just the number. Shalette stared at him. Something moved across her face that she wasn't ready to name. 10 days before the wedding, I made one call to my card issuer. I did not call the venue. I did not call Shalette. I simply contacted the card issuer and revoked authorization for any future charges tied to the wedding deposits that had been placed on my card. The entire call took 4 minutes. The venue still had my information on file, but the next time the billing system attempted to process a scheduled authorization, it would not go through. I knew how those systems worked. I had worked inside systems like them for 30 years. Then I returned to my morning. The venue coordinator called Shalette at 11:43. I know the time because Shalette's first call to me came in at 12:01. 18 minutes after the coordinator would have finished explaining the situation professionally, without drama, the way coordinators at properties like that are trained to handle billing discrepancies. The authorization attempt had failed. An updated payment method was needed within 48 hours to hold the date. Shalette was the designated wedding contact on the account, so the call went to her first. I watched Shalette's name appear on my screen and I let it ring through. She called again at 12:04. Voicemail. A minute later, a message came through, her voice starting at the register she uses when she is trying to sound unbothered, sliding by the end into something rawer and less controlled. She needed me to call her back. It was urgent. There had been some kind of mix-up with the venue. 3 texts followed in the next 10 minutes, the first measured, the second shorter, the third just my name with a period after it. I read all 3. I responded to none. She called Sheldon next. I was not on that call. What happened afterward was pieced together later from conversations Shalette and others described to me. Sheldon did what Sheldon often did when a difficult number was placed in front of him. He went quiet. Shalette told me she explained the deposit situation. He asked her to repeat the amount. Then came a silence long enough to tell her the answer she needed was not coming easily. He said he needed a few days to move some things around. She asked what things. He said he would handle it. He did not say yes. That evening, Shalette sat down alone with her bank account. The details of what she found came from her much later, after everything else had already happened. The account she had built her confidence around was not what she believed it was. The joint account withdrawals, steady, consistent, across 2 years, had been filling gaps in her own finances that she had never examined directly. She had been drawing from one side to cover the other without ever sitting down, with the full picture. Without what I had been providing beneath her, her own financial floor was lower than anything she had ever performed in front of anyone. I think about that moment sometimes. Shalette, alone in her apartment, the screen in front of her, no audience, no performance available. Just the numbers and what they said. There is a particular kind of reckoning that happens when the story you have been telling about your own life meets the actual evidence of it. It does not announce itself, it just sits there on the screen and waits. She sat with it for a long time. Then she opened her contacts. She scrolled past my name without stopping, kept going. Her thumb slowed and stopped on one name, Judith Price. Shalette told me later that she stared at that name for several minutes. Judith was the only person connected to Sheldon's side of this who might have resources, who might have influence, who might have been able to bridge something before the 48-hour window closed. She did not call. Something stopped her, pride or instinct, or a warning she couldn't yet put language to. She just sat there with Judith's name on the screen and her thumb not moving. My attorney called at 9:30 the following morning. She did not open with pleasantries. That is not how we work together. She said she had something she thought I should know before we moved any further with the lease separation and account restructuring. I told her to go ahead. The apartment complex's legal office had returned several documents connected to the lease file. Nothing unusual. Standard paperwork, contact records, prior disclosures, most of it administrative. What caught my attorney's attention was not something she found in a court filing. It was something she found missing. Sheldon had submitted updated financial information for the apartment file, but several categories were grouped together under broad monthly expenses rather than itemized. Perfectly legal, perfectly common, but unusual enough that she asked a simple question during a follow-up conversation with the apartment's legal office. The answer she received was equally simple. There was a recurring court-ordered obligation associated with Sheldon's financial profile that had never appeared anywhere in the discussions surrounding the wedding, the apartment, or the future he had described to Shalette. My attorney did what attorneys do. She verified what was publicly verifiable. She explained what she found carefully, the way she explains everything, without editorializing, without pause for reaction, just the facts in sequence. A child support order out of Fulton County. A boy, 6 years old. The child was born before Sheldon and Shalette's relationship began, from a prior relationship that had ended before he ever met my daughter. The obligation was established, documented, and current. Every payment made on time, which meant this had not been a crisis he was managing. It had been a commitment he was concealing, quietly, consistently, across every year he had been with Shalette. When she finished, I asked one question. Does Shalette know? She said there was nothing suggesting she had ever been made aware. I thanked her. I told her to add it to the file. I ended the call. I sat in my study for a long time after that. I want to be honest about what moved through me in that silence, because it was not satisfaction and it was not grief. It was something closer to recognition. The kind that comes when a pattern you sensed but could not name finally shows its shape completely. Sheldon had needed this wedding underwritten. He had needed the rates my relationships provided, the deposits my card covered, the infrastructure my name made possible, because beneath the surface of the life he was presenting to my daughter, there was a financial obligation she did not know existed. I had the information. I could have called Shalette within the hour. I could have placed that case number in front of her and watched everything accelerate. I chose not to. Not to protect Sheldon. I felt nothing on his behalf. I chose not to because Shalette made her decision at that dinner table clearly and publicly, and I had made mine in an attorney's office 6 weeks before she pointed to that chair. What Sheldon had hidden was his reckoning to carry to her. I was not going to pick up one more thing that did not belong to me. I opened my desk drawer instead. The photograph has lived in that drawer for 8 years. Since the week after Norbert passed, when I moved it from his study because I could not look at it from the doorway anymore, but could not put it away entirely. His father took it on Savannah's River Street in 1971, black and white. Norbert at the railing in a good suit, hat in his hand, looking out at the water the way men look at things they intend to return to. I turned it over. On the back, in his handwriting, the particular slant he used when he was writing something he meant. One day, Joss, just us. We never went. There was always something that needed handling first. I looked at the photograph for a moment, then I set it down and opened my laptop. I was not thinking about the withdrawal anymore. I was thinking about what comes after it. Those are two different orientations, and I felt the shift between them clearly. I typed one word into the search field, Savannah. I had not pressed search yet. I just looked at the word on the screen. This chapter belongs to Shalette. 3 weeks before the wedding, she was at the apartment on a Tuesday evening, organizing the financial disclosure folder Sheldon had asked her to compile for a joint bank account application. It was the kind of administrative task she had always handled between them. He gathered the documents. She put them in order. The folder was thick. She worked through it methodically, the way she approaches most things that require her to appear capable. She was 3/4 through the stack when she found it, behind a bank statement, slightly tucked, not hidden with any particular care, just slipped behind something else the way a document gets when a person runs out of time to think about where to put it. A printed page. She pulled it out, assuming it was another statement. It was not. Child support payment schedule. Fulton County family court case number. A boy's first name. A monthly amount that matched what Sheldon had always described to her as a personal expense category he handled separately. The child was 6 years old, born before they met, from a relationship that had ended before Sheldon ever said her name for the first time. She read it once, then she read it again, then a third time. Not because the words were unclear, but because her mind kept arriving at the end of the page and refusing to move past it. She photographed it with her phone, placed it back behind the bank statement exactly as she had found it, closed the folder, set it on the counter, walked to the bathroom, closed the door, turned the faucet on, and stood over the sink with the water running and her hands gripping the edge of the basin. She did not cry. I want to be precise about that because it matters. What Shalette felt in that bathroom was not grief. It was the particular stillness that descends when something you suspected, without knowing you suspected it, finally shows itself completely. She did not confront Sheldon that evening. She made dinner. She sat across from him at the table they shared, and she looked at his face and she said nothing. The next day was the same, and the day after. She carried it for 4 days, knowing something he did not know she knew, calculating the right moment the way you calculate something you only get to use once. I recognized that weight when she described it to me later. It is the same weight Darlette placed on my kitchen table 3 days before that dinner. Silent knowledge has a particular gravity. It does not get lighter with time. It just gets more precise. On the 4th day, she waited until he was seated at the kitchen table before she came in. She set her phone down between them with the photograph of the document on the screen, and she sat down across from him without saying a word. He looked at the screen for a long time. She watched his face move through several things before it settled on the one he decided to present to her. What came out of his mouth was not an apology. It was a sequence, a timeline, a context, a framing, an explanation built to manage her response rather than to account for his choice. She sat through all of it without interrupting. She understood the difference between an apology and an explanation now in a way she had not before that evening. An apology requires the other person. An explanation only requires an audience. That night, she got in her car and drove. She did not plan a destination. She found herself on my street without deciding to go there. She parked across from my house and sat with the engine idling, looking at the lit windows, the kitchen light, the study lamp she would have recognized from childhood. She sat there for 20 minutes. Then she put the car in drive and left. The street was empty after her taillights disappeared. 1 week before the wedding, Shalette called the hospitality contact, whose name she had found in her mother's files. I know she found it there because she told me which name she used. A man I had worked alongside for 19 years. Someone who had taken my calls at 7 in the morning without complaint, because we had built the kind of professional relationship that survives reorganizations and ownership changes and the slow attrition of the industry. She called him and referenced my name within the first 2 sentences. I know that too, because he called me afterward, briefly, to let me know. The conversation was polite. He is always polite. That is not a performance with him. It is simply how he is. But the warmth in his voice when she said my name was not warmth for Shalette. She would have felt the difference even if she couldn't have named it. He explained, gently and without cruelty, that the rates extended on the venue deposit were based on a 30-year professional relationship with me personally, that those terms were not transferable, that he was sorry he couldn't be more helpful. Then he asked a simple question. Has your mother approved these changes? Shalette told me later that she hesitated before answering. That hesitation told him everything. The conversation ended shortly afterward. She thanked him and hung up. Then she called the catering contact. Different person, same industry, same result. The warmth was there. My name still carried it. But the wall was there too, in exactly the same place. What Shalette encountered on those 2 calls was not hostility. It was something harder to argue against than hostility. It was the simple, structural reality that every door this wedding had walked through opened because of who I was in that world, not who she was anywhere. She sat in her car after the second call and looked at her phone for a long time. Then she called Darlette. Not to ask for intercession. Shalette is too proud for that, or at least she believes she is. She called because she had run through the list of people available to her, and Darlette was the last name on it that was still connected to me without being fully closed off. Darlette listened to all of it. She did not offer solutions. She did not reach for sympathy. She let Shalette finish completely before she said anything. Then she said quietly, "You know who you need to call." Shalette said she was not ready. Darlette said, "That's always been the problem." The call ended shortly after. Darlette phoned me within the hour. She told me Shalette had called. She told me what was said, the vendor calls, the walls, the conversation. I listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, I said, "I know." 2 words. Darlette understood them completely. She has known me long enough to know that when I say, "I know," I mean I have already accounted for it. After the call, I went to Norbert's study. I have kept that room exactly as he left it. His chair behind the desk, his books in the order he kept them, the lamp on the side table that he preferred to the overhead light. I sat in his chair, not at the desk, just in the chair, and I let the room be quiet around me. I did not cry. I sat in the place where he used to think, and I thought. Then I opened the desk drawer. I picked up the photograph, turned it over, read the back once, his handwriting, his words, the thing we never got around to doing. I set it down, picked up my phone. I booked the flight in 4 minutes, 1 seat. Departure 7 in the morning. The confirmation came through while I was still holding the phone. Savannah. I looked at the word on the screen, the way you look at something you should have done a long time ago. The wedding was 1 week away. I would not be there. 5 days before the wedding, Judith Price called her son. I know how that conversation went because Judith told me herself, not that evening, but later, in the brief call she made to me that I will get to shortly. Judith is not a woman who softens things for the sake of comfort. She raised Sheldon alone from the time he was 14 years old, and she has always known the difference between a son who is handling something and a son who is handling the story of something. She had heard about the venue deposit through the coordinator, a woman she knew socially, the kind of contact that exists in every city between women of a certain age and a certain circle. The card had been declined. The account had not been resolved. The wedding was 5 days away. She called Sheldon and asked him directly what was happening with the finances. He told her things were being reorganized and would be handled. She let him finish, and then she asked him the question she had been holding for 2 years. She asked about the child. Sheldon had told her himself, not intentionally, but during a difficult conversation 2 years prior when something had slipped through the managed exterior he presents to everyone. She had sat with that information on the condition he gave her, that he would tell Shalette before the wedding. He had been specific about that. Judith told me she had raised the issue more than once over those 2 years. Each time he assured her the conversation would happen before any marriage took place. She had believed him because she needed to believe him, and because she told herself it was not her disclosure to make. The child was not a secret she approved of. It was a truth she believed her son was eventually going to handle himself. His silence on the phone when she asked about it now told her everything. The silence had a shape to it. The particular compression of a man who has just understood that the timeline has collapsed around him. Someone else had found it. Shalette had not been told. The wedding was in 5 days, and nothing had been resolved. Judith told her son something then that I believe she had been working toward for longer than that phone call. She told him that her silence at the rehearsal dinner had been a mistake she had thought about every single day since it happened. That she had watched a woman get directed to a fold-out chair in a room she had paid for, and she had said nothing because she was calculating, assuming the money would flow the way it always had, assuming the foundation would hold because it always had. She said, That woman sat alone at a table she paid for, and none of us said a word. That's not something you recover from easily. Sheldon did not respond in any way she described to me as meaningful. After she ended that call, Judith called me. I was in Norbert's study when my phone rang and I saw her name. I answered. She did not waste either of our time. She said she was sorry for what had happened at the dinner. Not sorry in the loose way people use the word to avoid accountability, but sorry in the way that acknowledges a specific moment and a specific failure to act inside it. It was brief. It was direct. It was the most honest thing anyone connected to that evening had said to me since it happened. I said, "I appreciate you saying so, Judith." Nothing more. She understood what that meant. Not hostility, not forgiveness, not an open door. A door that was simply no longer being held. After we ended the call, Judith did not phone Sheldon back. She called her own attorney instead. I only know this because she told me, and I understood immediately what it meant. Judith was separating herself from whatever was coming. She was done calculating on her son's behalf. That evening, Sheldon came home to find the bedroom light already off at 8 o'clock. He stood in the doorway and said Shalette's name. She did not answer. He closed the door quietly. He sat alone in the living room in the dark. For the first time in this entire story, there was no audience and no performance available to him. 4 days before the wedding, my son called me. Not about Shalette, not about the wedding, not about anything he had heard or pieced together from the edges of what had been unfolding. Philip called because 3 weeks had passed since we last spoke, and he wanted to hear my voice. That was the whole reason. When you have spent years surrounded by people who reach for you because they need something, a call that needs nothing lands differently than I can easily describe. I answered and we talked the way we used to talk when he was in college, and I would pick up on the first ring regardless of the hour. Easily, without agenda, moving from one thing to the next, without any of it needing to go somewhere. After a while, I told him about the dinner, not the accounts, not the trust, not the vendors or the attorney or any of the architecture I had been quietly dismantling and rebuilding. Just the dinner, the room, the chair, what Shalette said, what I did, what I said when the bill arrived. Philip listened through all of it without a word. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone searching for the right response, but the silence of someone absorbing something that has weight. Then he said, "I should have been there." I said, "You weren't invited." Another silence. Then, "I know. I should have come anyway." I did not tell him he was wrong because he wasn't. We sat with that together for a moment without either of us needing to move past it. Then I told him about the trust. I was careful about how I said it. Careful to make clear that it was not a reward for his steadiness and not a punishment for Shalette's choices. It was a decision made in clarity, over time, about the shape of things as they actually were rather than as I had spent years hoping they might become. I told him his name was in it and his children's names and that I needed him to understand it had nothing to do with that dinner. Philip did not say, "Thank you." He did not say he deserved it or that it was fair. What he did was go quiet in a different way, a heavier way. And when he spoke again, his voice had something in it that I recognized as grief for what the family had become across these years. For the distance that had grown between him and his sister while neither of them was paying close enough attention to stop it. For the fact that his mother had been carrying the weight of all of it quietly and alone for longer than anyone had thought to ask about. He asked me, after a while, whether there was anything that could still change things between Shalette and me. I told him the truth. "The door is not locked, Philip, but I am done standing at it with it propped open." He understood. He has always understood things without needing them explained twice. Then he asked me something else. Carefully. The way you ask something when you are not sure you want to know the answer. Did you eat anything that night? I paused. Longer than I intended to. I wasn't hungry. Mama. Just that. Just my name. The way he has said it since he was small, with the particular weight that means he sees me and he wishes I had let someone see me sooner. I told him I was going to Savannah the following week. He said, good. Not, have a nice time. Not, you deserve it. Just good. Like it was the only right answer, and he was relieved I had finally arrived at it. After we hung up, I went to my kitchen. I cooked a full meal. Nothing complicated, just food made with attention and time. I set the table for one, sat down, and I ate every bite without rushing, without distraction, without leaving anything on the plate. I looked at that empty plate for a long time before I got up. 2 days before the wedding, my doorbell rang at 10:30 in the morning. I knew before I reached the door. There are sounds a mother learns across 34 years. The particular rhythm of a knock, the weight of a presence on the other side of a door before it opens. I looked through the glass and saw Shalette standing on my porch in a jacket she had owned for 3 years. No bag, no rehearsed expression. Just her. I opened the door, stepped aside. She walked in without a word, and I closed the door behind her. We sat in the living room. I did not offer food or coffee. She did not ask for any. We sat across from each other in the quiet of a room she had grown up in, and she looked at me the way you look at someone when you have finally run out of angles. She asked about the accounts first, then the vendors, then the reservation. She had found the hotel confirmation in a folder I had not hidden, because I had never needed to hide it. Then, the trust. She had pieced the architecture together across the preceding days, and what she needed now was not the facts, but the timeline. She needed to understand when. I told her everything, in the same voice I use for everything. Level, unhurried, without performance in either direction. I told her when the trust was filed. I told her that the reservation had been in my name from the night I called my contact 6 weeks before the dinner. I told her about the joint account pattern, not as an accusation, just as a fact I had finally laid flat and looked at directly. And I told her that not one decision in any of it had been made at that dinner. The dinner was the last confirmation of something I had already completed. She listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked me the question that had been underneath everything from the beginning. Did you ever actually love me? Or was I always just something you managed? The room went still in the way rooms go still when something true has finally been said out loud. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, the way I had not allowed myself to in years, because looking directly at something painful requires accepting that it is there. And I said what was also true. I loved you so completely that I made you believe the foundation was just there. That was my mistake. Not the loving, the hiding of what it cost. She held that for a moment. Then she told me about the document in the folder, the child, the 4 days she carried it without saying anything, sitting outside this house in her car and driving away without getting out. I listened to all of it without moving. When she finished, I said, I know about the child. She stared at me. You knew? I found out 8 days ago. It was not mine to tell you. I watched her absorb that. I could see the exact moment it landed, the understanding that the woman she had spent years diminishing had held information that could have ended everything and had chosen not to use it. Not for Sheldon's sake, not for the wedding's sake, simply because it did not belong to her to carry. She glanced once at the photograph on the wall. I did not follow her eyes. I already knew what she was looking at. We did not reconcile that morning. I want to be honest about that because this story has been honest about everything else. What happened in that room was two women finally seeing each other without the performance that had been running between us for years. Shalette left without an apology. She also left without a performance. For where we were, that was something. I closed the door, stood in my hallway, touched the frame of Norbert's photograph once with the tips of my fingers. Then I went to finish packing my bag. The wedding was in 2 days. I would not be there. The day before the wedding, Sheldon sent a text at 7 in the morning. Shalette told me about this call weeks later, the way she had told me about the others, carefully, in pieces, like someone still deciding how much of a thing they can say out loud. I am telling it the way she told it to me. The text said he needed to talk before they went any further. Not a call, a text. She called him back within 2 minutes. He did not answer. She called again. And again. 4 times in 12 minutes, each one going to voicemail. On the 5th call, he picked up. He did not open with an apology or a greeting. He started talking, and she let him because she understood instinctively that stopping him would give him a reason to reframe before he finished. He told her about the credit cards first, balances that had grown larger than she knew. Then the personal loan he had taken against his 401k 2 years earlier. The same year he had told her his finances were in a strong position and they should start thinking seriously about their future together. Then he gave her the full number, the complete picture, not a new problem, the real size of an existing one. Later, when she told me about that call, she admitted there had been small things she had never fully examined. Statements he preferred to receive electronically, conversations about money that ended with broad assurances instead of actual numbers. Occasional moments when he seemed unusually tense after checking an account balance before quickly moving on. None of it had seemed large enough to question at the time. Looking back, she realized the signs had not been absent. They had simply never been arranged side by side until that morning. The number was significantly worse than anything she had prepared herself for. He told her he had believed that once they were married and the finances were pooled, it would become manageable. He used the word pooled without hesitation. The way you use a word you have rehearsed without noticing you rehearsed it. Shalette said she heard that word and understood immediately what it contained. Not a partnership, a calculation. She had been a variable in a financial equation she had never been shown. She asked him one question. Did you need my mother's money to make this work? 4 seconds of silence. She counted them. Then, it would have helped. Not yes. Not I'm sorry. Not I should have told you. Just the careful linguistic distance of a man who had spent years managing the space between what was true and what he was willing to own. It would have helped. As though her mother's money were a convenience rather than something he had quietly assumed would always be there. Shalette told him she needed 24 hours. He asked if the wedding was still happening. She said she would let him know and ended the call. She sat down on the floor of her bedroom with her back against the bed, the apartment her mother's name had made possible, and looked at the wedding dress hanging on the back of the door. She had picked it up from the alterations shop 6 days ago. It had been hanging there since, covered in its garment bag, waiting for a morning that was now less than 24 hours away. She did not call me. She did not call Darlette. She called Philip. He answered before the second ring. She told him everything. Sheldon's text, the 5 calls, the number, the word pooled, the 4 seconds of silence before it would have helped. Philip listened through all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he did not offer her an opinion or a direction. He said one thing. Whatever you decide, not for him, not for Mama, not for anybody watching, You decide it for you. She told me later that she had to sit with those words for a moment because she could not immediately remember the last time someone had said something to her that was purely about her. Not about managing an impression or protecting a position or maintaining an arrangement. Just her. She looked at the dress for a long time after she hung up. The garment bag, the quiet room, the question that was still open. I do not know what she decided in that room. She never told me and I never asked. What I know is that before I turned off my lamp that night, I looked at my phone one last time. The flight confirmation was still on the screen. Savannah. Departure, 7 in the morning. I set the phone face down on the nightstand, turned off the light, and went to sleep. The room went dark. Wedding morning. 6:45. I was at Hartsfield-Jackson before the terminal filled up, sitting in a window seat at the Gate Cafe with a coffee I had ordered without rushing, and a bag at my feet that I had packed for myself. Not for an occasion, not for an appearance, just for 4 days, in a city I had been meaning to get to for a long time. I was dressed comfortably and well, the way I dress when I am going somewhere that belongs entirely to me. My phone was on the table, face down. I had turned the notifications off before I left the house. I boarded when my zone was called. Window seat, left side of the plane, which faces east on departure and then swings south over the city before the flight path straightens toward the coast. I watched Atlanta come into view below me as we climbed. The skyline I have driven through in every kind of weather for 30 years. The sprawl extending in every direction the way it always has. The highways that I know by the feel of their interchanges before I see their signs. From up here, it looked exactly like what it was. A place I had lived. A place I had managed and built inside and given most of myself to. Not the only place I could breathe. I did not think about what was happening below me on that morning. I want to be precise about that. I did not actively choose not to think about it. It simply was not present. The decision not to monitor, not to insert, not to wait for a phone to tell me how something was unfolding without me. That decision had been made on the ground before I ever reached the airport. Up here, there was only the window and the clouds thinning out below us and the coffee I had finished before takeoff and the particular quality of silence that exists at altitude when you have nowhere to be but where you are going. My phone buzzed once somewhere over the middle of the flight. I felt it in my jacket pocket. I left it there. I looked out the window instead. The restaurant was on River Street, 20 minutes, from the airport by cab. A window table, I had not requested it. It was simply what was available, and I understood when I sat down and saw the water that it was the right one. The host brought a menu and wished me a good morning without knowing anything about me. That anonymity was something I had not felt in years, and I sat inside it for a moment before I opened the menu. I ordered a full breakfast. Everything I wanted, chosen without consideration for anyone else's preferences or schedule or appetite. The food came without ceremony. The river outside moved the way rivers move, indifferently, continuously, without any awareness of the particular weight this specific morning carried for the woman sitting at the window watching it. Norbert's father had stood on that street in 1971. Norbert had wanted to come back. I was here now, alone by choice, and the water looked exactly as it must have looked in the photograph, wide and unhurried, and entirely itself. I did not need to take the photograph out to know that. I carried the image the way you carry things that have been looked at long enough to become interior. I was halfway through my meal when my phone buzzed again on the table. I looked at the screen. One text, Shalette's name. I opened it. The first line said, "The wedding isn't happening." Then 4 more words. "I hope you're okay." Not an apology. Not an explanation. Not a negotiation or a performance or a question designed to open a door she needed something from. Just a fact and 4 words from a woman who had finally reached the end of everything else and had nothing left to send but the simplest, true thing. I read the message once, set the phone face down on the table, picked up my fork. The river kept moving outside the window. My plate was in front of me, full and warm, and I was in no hurry at all. This story was never about whether Shalette deserved an answer. It was about whether I deserved peace. I did.